Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Robert Duigan, who is a South African of English descent, which is different than the South Africans of the Dutch descent, which are the Afrikaners, also known as the Boers, or the South Africans of Zulu descent, which are known as the Blacks. And then there is a group of people called colored that trace their lineage through various other lines than those that are aforementioned. If you couldn't already tell, South Africa is a very complex country with a very complex history, a lot of different interests. And in this conversation, Robert and I get into that complexity from his perspective as an English South African. I do think that South Africa has a particular place in our world affairs, not necessarily because of its strategic capability or its material capability. It does have human capital and resources and stuff like that, but because it shows just how complex governing variety of cultures, ethnicities, languages, and people is, and how different interest groups can corrupt harmony and unity when we're talking about so many disparate groups with disparate cultures and values and so on and so forth. You can find Robert's work linked in the description, as well as links to support this channel if you so desire. Without further ado, here is Robert Duigan.
So the way that us white people talk, we tend to talk over each other a lot. But when you're having a conversation with a black person in South Africa, the etiquette of speech is a bit different, and they're a bit more patient with it. At least guys who are from a bit more of a rural background, this is much more true, and it'll be taken. Little interruptions you have to sort of apologize for them, even if there's clarification. Because what happens is someone says their entire piece, everything they've got on their mind, and then they stop. And then you say your entire piece, everything that's on your mind, and then you stop. And no one interrupts each other. There's a very particular rhythm to it. And it's considered rude, but it won't generally be remarked on if you break that. But some people will say something, and it took me many years before I realized that was like the way to do a proper conversation with him. Yeah. So in the cities, it's a bit different because, like a lot of them go to like former, what they call Model C schools. And so it's not quite the same vibe. I mean, they get acculturated in a former white elite school. And then for all intents and purposes, they've got both sort of speech etiquette patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Off topic, but yeah.
No, I think it's all very a part of the topic. I mean, how does one articulate a country out of so many disparate ethnicities, cultures, languages?
I think of it a lot like, a fishing trawler where somebody's gone trawling in the ocean, supposedly to catch, I don't know, tuna or whatever. And they pick up all of the octopus and sea bream and red snapper that live there. And some fish don't make it at the depth that the net is being hauled up to. And the country was never created with any of the residents' interests at heart. It was created for resource extraction by foreign power. So, it's just, the sort of resentment and claustrophobia is baked into the country. There's not the sense that there's this founding group that is in charge. The Afrikaners had that to some extent, but they're sort of, not in power anymore. And black people have a sort of uneasy relationship with the country as an idea. So they feel a sense of ownership. Ownership's not the right word, because it's like they know they're entitled to the country in a sense, but that sense of ownership always feels incomplete. And you can see it in the intellectuals and the way they write about it. There's like a need to, in a sense, abolish country one way or another, whether it's institutionally or geographically. And so there are various efforts to try and dismantle or transform the country. I mean, that's sort of that's the essence of the entire political project since 1994 is transformation, capital T.
Yeah.
And it affects the legal system very, very heavily as well. And we got, yeah.
Could I ask a
Yeah, sorry. I
question?
mean, I was trying to prevent myself from going down another long rabbit hole there.
I think it's a warren. There are many, many runnels to explore. But do you think that communism is attractive to the black elite because of its emphasis on transformation and its promise of some sort of resolution? And they're looking for that. And if they can dismantle and rejigger the political project via communism, that's a vehicle for that unrest.
I think that's part of it, but I actually, just for the South African context, I think the reason that communism became a particular feature of black political culture is primarily because the communists were the first elements of white society that actually interacted with them and gave them a key to understanding how to change the system. So it was because the ANC, which has been around since 1912, was originally, it didn't have any ideological component. It was originally a group of sort of educated urbanites and royalty and, aristocrats, effectively, who, I mean, for example, Nelson Mandela, Amatembu prince, he was in line to the throne of the Amatembu, and he renounced that in order to pursue his political career. So there is this sort of there's a big break that happens in like 30s, 40s, especially going into the 50s. There's a complete transformation of the party, and they don't just go communist. They actually, the leadership of the ANC is also the leadership of the SACP, the South African Communist Party. And that leadership is subservient to the Comintern, takes direct instructions on policy positions and, strategy and everything from the Comintern. This has been covered by a Russian historian called Vladimir Shubin, who used to serve in the old government. So he's written a few books about this. Yeah, no. So I mean, I think most of the ANC's history they were in direct instruction to the point that even though O.R. Tambo was extremely high-ranking in 1971, they could tell him whether or not he was allowed to go on a given sort of mission. I could get into Operation Jake, but that's a whole detour. It's certainly quite interesting, but it would take some time to give a bit of context there, and yeah.
Everything.
But the transformational element that you pick up on is, I think, correct, and there's another element here, which I think is perhaps pertinent, which is if you look at the traditional political culture, there is a distinct lack of separation of powers between, executive, judiciary, legislative. These concepts don't really apply to a traditional African community. For a popular and accessible source, I mean, Nelson Mandela, in some of the opening chapters, he does describe a little bit of the protocols, somewhat. Best book, I think, for understanding this would be from, I think it was 2010 or 2013, somewhere around there. I can't think something Williams, and the book is called Chieftaincy, State, and Democracy, and it's like this very in-depth study of all of the mores and understandings around traditional leadership in South Africa. But the basic thing is that your chief. It's a weird word because I mean, in a funny sort of sense, I always think of the House of Lords in the UK and how they were all sort of at some point sort of landed warlords that then gradually incorporated, and until 1911 they held sort of combinatory powers that weren't strictly defined along legislative, executive, judiciary. So there is that sense in which the traditional leader has to perform a judicial function as well as a ceremonial one, and a sort of quasi-legislative function in the community. Um, and there's this idea that the land which is under his control is at his disposal, and who uses it for what is ultimately up to him. There's also the idea, there's also a component that sort of clashes as we move into the modern era, which is that um, that traditional authority was kept in check by the fact that the population was very sparse. So population estimates for the mid 19th century are around 2 million people for South Africa, which is 3 times the size of Germany. And so what you get is a situation where, well, if your chief is not handling such things properly, people pick up and leave, and they take cattle with them, and the chief's status and wealth and prestige falls, and so he has to be seen as fair and patient and what have you. There's that that's the check on his power. But when you get into the modern age and population levels rise and is closed, that changes completely, because now he has control over these people, but they don't really have much place to go, especially under apartheid, where there's heavily controlled, where you can live is heavily sort of limited. But the parts of the country they traditionally lived in, these very sort of fertile, high rainfall areas, is sort of like a horseshoe shape going around the north and east of the country. That was those areas have been sort of settled more or less for the past thousand and a half years, and those ended up being the areas that were recognized in homelands sort of policies that came from the British, and that the Afrikaners inherited. And then, yeah, no, I mean, I'm not going to give you the whole history of the sort of land and the Group Areas Act and everything like that, but suffice it to say, there was the whole apartheid thing is, everyone understands it as just being simply, well, we rocked up and we segregated things, but it's sort of policy really evolved over a very long period of time. I mean, this sort of separate development policy where you have, traditionally settled black areas are demarcated and limited in terms of property ownership and travel. That starts in Natal under Lord Shepstone before the Union of South Africa. And then what the Boer used to do in their republics was, well, they just sort of settle, you're over there, we're over here, and then the lines on the map denote exclusion zones for other European territories. Mm-hmm. So they don't mark the African territories on the map. They just sort of recognize on a treaty level politically, okay, we don't mess with you over here, you don't mess with us over here. And people look at the Boer republics and sort of think of them as like these very sophisticated things, but they, I mean, it's very few people numerically, and like a couple 100,000. It's like these are very small countries with they don't have complete control over the entire territory that's marked on the map. So when you have the Union of South Africa, everything becomes formalized and sort of institutionalized, and so everything changes, and it kind of becomes a trap. Mm-hmm. So you end up with all of these people who didn't choose to be part of this entity. And I mean, my understanding, I picked up, I think the communists are actually right about one thing. They have this theory about South Africa. They called it like colonialism of a special type. And so if you go look up like the old maps of the Bantustans and the homeland territories, you'll notice they're sort of parceled out around the rim of the country on the east. And then you've got sort of in the middle, you've got like all of the gold fields and minefields sort of clustered in the middle. And they're isolated from the ports. So the Union of South Africa exists for that reason predominantly. Access to ports for the mines and access to mines for the Cape and Natal colonies. So, but the mines were, once we unified the country, because that happened following the Boer War, you have half the Afrikaans population has been killed. Most of them been driven off their farms, and now they're flooding into the city looking for work. the mines, which are largely owned directly or indirectly by a tiny handful of people, mostly foreigners. Um, some of the families are still here, like the Oppenheimers and the Rothschilds are still huge features in our economy. Like most other places, the Rothschilds tend to be a little bit sort of one or two dimensions removed. Um, but yeah, their sort of agent here, Martin Kingston, is still the biggest recipient of contracts with, what they call black economic empowerment contracts. So they're first in line to the trough of the state. Yeah, and then the Oppenheimers, who literally wrote the black economic empowerment laws in 2003. And what they call the Brenthurst Initiative. So every time the dispensation changed, they welcomed in like a small sliver of the new dominant ethnicity into the economic elite. So before the Nationalist Party gained power, you almost exclusively have Englishmen and Jews in the leadership, in the economic leadership, and then afterwards, a few Afrikaners come in. And now that the state has provided access to black people, you've got a few of the new sort of ANC royalty, like the president and the president's brother-in-law, and a few of the luminaries. They're allowed into this upper clique. And I mean, it's a very, very small club. It's a very small club, the number of people who are at the top of the economy. And it all requires state access. Almost everybody is in some kind of cartel relationship wherever they're making their money. Mm-hmm. So it's a very dirty country, and it's when people talk about an oligarchy in Russia, it's much more extreme in South Africa, but it's very little commented on for obvious reasons. So yeah, we've got this very sort of ugly sort of political arrangement that shifts, almost like clockwork every 30 to 40 years. And we just get a whole system replacement. And
if they were running things correctly and smoothly, the oligarchs, then it wouldn't be a problem, presumably. Whether you have a elected government or an oligarchy or a monarchy, as long as
they're running the show. I think they're largely hands off until things get bad, and then they'll sort of like try and call for a rearrangement. But I think they're a bit stuck right now because, look, I mean, the previous century, the deal was basically you, Jan Smuts, are going to play. He basically ran the country on and off for about 50 years. He wrote the Constitution single-handedly. He wrote the League of Nations Constitution single-handedly. He wrote much of the United Nations Charter. Brokered the partition of Ireland, drafted the Balfour Declaration. Huge person, right? But he implemented the policies on behalf of the Chamber of Mines very, very well. What he did is he imposed a very heavy poll tax. Well, it's heavy for them, poll tax on the homelands. And these people are mostly subsistence farmers who don't handle specie very often. So they have to move to the cities to get currency. This is so that they can undercut the white labor in the cities that are starting to unionize. So you have this backlash that's eventually put down by gunfire in 1922. 2 years later, you have they elect a coalition government between Labour and Nationalism, the Labour Party and the Nationalist Party, who tried to nationalise the mines and failed to broker the deal because the Chamber of Mines basically threatened to dynamite their shafts and cripple the economy. The situation is really brutal, but the apartheid comes out of this compromise that's struck. We need our cheap labour. And they dominated the economy completely. So it's not, they weren't a bit part player. So they want their cheap labor, but the political system is going to be destabilized by populism if they don't offer some kind of compromise containment mechanism. So they say, you can have segregation. So they ramp up the segregation over this period. That version of the Nationalist Party was only in power for, I think, 4 years before they merged with the South African Party, which is their descendants are now the DA. They went through a few rebrands along the way, but they're the same party. So the Democratic Alliance, which claims to, they pretend they've only been around since 2000, but they've really been around since 1896. I mean, it's sort of stuff that you can look up on Wikipedia, but like it's not secret knowledge or any kind of conspiracy stuff. It's just they don't like to emphasize that they've been part of the procedure. They always say, no, 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 we're not the Nationalist Party. We're nothing like them. Yes and no. There's a lot of willful amnesia on all sides. I mean, with Adams van Sale, I'm sure he covered a lot of the sort of crimes of the ANC under apartheid. Their dirty shenanigans.
Could we focus in on segregation? How that worked? Who was in favor of it? Who wasn't in favor of it? Is it? It's not.
Almost
all
the white population was. Almost all the white population was in favor of it. I think people who want to sugarcoat this are being silly. But the reasons for it are, I think, have a parallel with what's happening in the West today. In that you have these white settlements that were deliberately set up fairly far from the main black population centers. I mean, the Cape is different. The Cape is a couple of centuries older, and that relationship is much more complicated. But in the interior, we're dealing with an area, as I say, 3 times the size of Germany, 2 million people. The idea that we couldn't find somewhere to settle, that where we wouldn't have to clear people, is absurd. And most settlements were not set up by simply clearing the brush of frightened little black children. There's this cartoon villain version of history that's usually told, and nobody cares to hear anything different. And because the black tribes weren't united, none of the territory between their sort of understood territory was really definitively claimed. So there was room for negotiation, and in some cases land was bought, sometimes it was taken, sometimes it was settled freely. Problem is that whole story is so ludicrously complicated, and every single place has a different history. It's like there's no overarching narrative which you can come out with to defend yourself against the more sweeping claim that the people in power sort of prefer. So because your self-defense is a wall of text and theirs is one line, they kind of win the debate.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is that you have to, the apartheid thing was, we are defending our settlements against mass migration change. And that's where that populist backlash comes from. And instead of actually getting what they want, they get a containment compromise that allows the trend to continue to the point where it's impossible to do anything and everything has to be given up. And now we're losing pretty much everything everywhere. There's very little place that you can go where you're not electorally dominated by another ethnicity, even at the municipal level. So, yeah, and that presents a lot of problems because it's a different political culture in ways that are complicated. Different ways of engaging, different ways of different sort of rhetorical styles, different understandings of what institutions are supposed to mean, different understandings of what terms like equality mean. I mean, there's that whole debate about the Constitution back from the 90s, where the equality we thought we were the white people thought they were giving was equality before the law. The equality that was understood by the other side is everyone is going to be materially equal. And because the idea of judging people at an individual level doesn't make sense politically in that context, the idea that we should be judged as individuals doesn't really stick. And people don't buy these liberal defenses. They look at it and say, "Oh, this is hogwash," because actually, look at you don't have nearly as much poor people in your ranks as we do. And until you are at or beneath our average level, then we will not consider you to have rights. And the problem with that is, the second you lose your comparative, advantage, well, then who's going to defend your rights? And the reason that this process was begun, I believe, it's a funny little theory I have. So there's this theory that the ANC have called the National Democratic Revolution. Now, it came out of the Communist Party in 1928, along with that theory of colonialism of a special type. So their ideological program has a very long pedigree. There's this incredible sense of patience, and there's this very strange way that, paradoxically, there's two sides to sort of African political culture where, on the one hand, there's this incredible sort of short-term, high time preference, sort of almost, frenetic sort of abandon with which any kind of future consideration is treated. So everything is consumed now, worry about it tomorrow. But on the other hand, there's this feeling of things are eternal. These past 400 years are a blip on the radar. Everything will go back to normal once the white man is gone, and we have all the time in the world. And I mean, Robert Mugabe said this as well. I mean, people telling him, you can't mine the minerals. Or how are you going to mine the minerals without, white expertise and so on and so forth. And he said, the minerals were in the ground before the white man showed up, and they'll be in the ground after they're gone. We have, we can mine them in 100 years. We could mine them tomorrow. Doesn't matter. And so there's this very different sort of perspective of time. So I think it makes it difficult to engage. So the National Democratic Revolution, the way they saw it is, it's Lenin's sort of two-stage process of revolution, but it happens much slower. So instead of taking power by arms, they didn't get that done. They got a compromised political settlement and took power in an election, gradually set about placing their cadres in the civil service, in the private sector through black economic empowerment, in the judiciary, all over the place. So they've got sort of an ideological stranglehold over the whole of society. Once they feel they've achieved that and the balance of forces in their favor, they decide, okay, then we move to stage two. And that stage two was decided in 2012 and was implemented first in 2019 when Cyril Ramaphosa came to power. Now, Ramaphosa and Zuma worked together on, they're seen as political enemies here by a lot of people because they had different patronage networks. But they worked together very closely on almost every matter through 80s and 90s. They have their differences, but they were the first two people that were met with by the national government, aside from Nelson Mandela. And they met them in private, in secret in Switzerland, in 89, or was it? I think it was 89. But they drew up in 2012. They drew up the sort of outline of, okay, well, we're going to move towards sort of basically Zimbabwe-style disposition of land, all of this gradually, also centralization of the healthcare system and all kinds of stuff. And they did a magnificent bait and switch with the biggest health insurance company, Discovery. They basically convinced them that they were going to get a state-sanctioned monopoly over health insurance, and then rug pulled them at the last minute. So they got the biggest insurance giant in the country to back the nationalization of the entire healthcare industry, and then said, no, you're not going to get a deal, and no, you're not going to be allowed to trade in our country. So go screw yourself. Now they're crying, they're crying crocodile tears, but the bill's law now. They haven't implemented it yet, but it's coming, and the paw will hit the fan soon enough. The second phase, the reason my little theory is that they decided on it to do it in 2012 because it was at that point that the ownership, by almost any metric that you care to select, the wealth inequality between black and white on average tipped in that year. So in 2013, you find that of all domestically owned shares on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, 22 were owned, slightly more were owned by black than by white. Slightly more. That's the last time I could find public figures for it. So, I mean, the figures must exist, but I don't know what they are. The rest are foreign owned, so like about half the stock market is foreign owned. Um, and it was also in the 2011 census, it came back and it showed that house ownership in terms of both value and number, tipped over. Now it's like only 35% of white people own their homes outright, as opposed to sort of basically mortgaged or renting from financial institutions. Whereas 57 or 60%, depending on who you trust, of black people own their own homes outright. And so you've got that was the inflection point at which we lost our ability in the private sector to negotiate on undeniable terms with the state, even in a passive sense. And so now this is my understanding is that this is the reason they moved forward. Is they looked, okay, the wealth's tipped that way. There's no way they could mobilize any kind of political resistance. We can move forward with greater ease. And it's to my eternal teeth grinding frustration. I watch pretty much, sorry, my chair's actually sinking. Almost underline my point. But it's to my eternal frustration that I watch all of the organizations whose mandate is to do something radical about our situation. There's this invisible Rubicon that they refuse to cross. And I'm not, it's not even, the thing is, from my perspective, the actions they need to take don't even involve violence. They just involve very sort of certain concrete steps to attaining some kind of local autonomy. Some of them, many of them are legal. Many of them are not even expensive. Some of them are definitely expensive. And I've done a lot of research on this. I did a lot of research for AfriForum and Solidarity, touching on a lot of these questions. And my frustration is that I don't see people moving fast enough. I don't see people making decisive moves. And I'm a researcher. I'm a little sort of, I'm a bookworm who's staring at this problem and thinking, like, what the hell do I do? Because I did a couple of years ago, I wanted to see how long the country could last. Because I'd heard, because I'd been looking at this graph from the OECD about Western countries, and you watched the percentage of GDP taken up by government spending, just rising up and up and up. And I thought, there's no way this is sustainable. And then I thought for a second, we are much poorer, and we are also heading in that direction. We way overextended welfare, like 50% of the country is dependent on state welfare, blah, blah, blah. So I thought, because Zimbabwe went this way, they actually got themselves in the hole they're in first by bankrupting the country by paying for like extensive welfare programs. They got exquisite education and healthcare programs for the first 10 years. And then people come to collect the debt, and it starts to fall apart, and the government clamps down and starts squeezing the country dry to make sure that it can maintain its grip on power. It's more or less what it is. So I said, well, what if it happens here? What would the timeline be? Because it's no good sort of crying wolf if you can't say, yeah, okay, the wolf is 2 kilometers that way. Then people are just, So I thought, well, okay, but I'm not the most sophisticated sort of economist and accountant or anything like that. So I tried a really, really basic thing where I asked around to come up with my economist friends and looked up what are good rules of thumb for when a state's about to go bankrupt or whatever. And there's this thing called Bernhold's ratio, which is, I must remember now, I did this a couple of years ago, 40% of debt to expenditure ratio, I think, or something like that. And then there's the standard sort of ratio of, debt to GDP, 90 to 95%. Typically, when a low to middle income country gets to those thresholds, they're going to go bankrupt, default on their debts, or start printing money or whatever. And I thought, okay, well, when are we going to cross this threshold? And I used a couple of average. This is very crude. Any economist can hear this. Is very, very bloody crude. I know that I was being silly, but I did this thing where I sort of said, well, okay, let's take the average sort of trends from the Treasury, sort of headline Treasury figures for the past 10 years. 10-year average, the first 5-year average, and the second 5-year average, and then project those three trends forwards and see what happens. When do those thresholds cross? And I got a range of dates that were around from 2028 till 2035. So sometime in there, the state's going to go bankrupt. And I thought, okay, that doesn't look too good. And then about a year and a half, 2 years later, the most respected economist in the country, David Wirth, comes out and says, yes, we are likely to go bankrupt sometime in 2030 to 2035. And I thought, holy shit, I wasn't completely bananas. But he said something I hadn't anticipated. He also said that if South Africa collapses, then it's not all that's going to collapse, because all of the surrounding countries in the SADC sort of trade region, they depend on South Africa for trade, and not only for trade, but literally for almost every country bordering South Africa. They depend for at least a third of their state revenue on tariff duties from trade through South Africa and in the surrounding region. Which means that if the South African economy goes under, it's the whole of sub-Saharan Africa will collapse. You'll see a continent-wide economic collapse. I mean, it absolutely boggles my mind. I think about this with like this. I mean, I don't know. I feel somewhat like I'm living through a bad Arthur Dent joke, because right outside my house there's a sinkhole because the local municipality hasn't fixed the culvert by my river for 60 years. And so there's a sinkhole that's advancing on my property. And I just feel like at every level, it's just, you know, whether it's my house, whether it's my town, whether it's my province or my country or my continent, everything's just sort of edging towards the abyss.
You said
And
you're frustrated that people aren't doing enough or much. What would they do?
I'll put it this way. There are a lot of compensatory projects that manage the decline, help you deal with present situations. As you enter into a new kind of era where you're going to see the state really starting to act more and more erratically, you need to shift gears to gain actual autonomy, to be able to provide your own security, to provide your own sort of localized governance, formally or informally, regardless of how you mean it. De facto, you have to be in control of your own communities and your own little territory around them and so on. And that's certainly not true for most of them. And I think that you're going to see a lot of unnecessary destruction if people do not act now. And it's not like, oh, okay, everyone's going to die, there's going to be genocide or whatever. It's not like that. It's more boring to describe, because it's just going to be, life is going to get shit extremely rapidly for a large number of people. It's going to be very difficult to deal with. And there's going to be a great deal of chaos and all kinds of sporadic violence. And it's just going to suck enormously. There's never going to be a point at which, someone fires the starting pistol. Okay, guys, assemble your armies. That's not how this environment's going to work. It's just going to decay very rapidly. And that's the problem. Is I look at this and I think it's just, there's no moment at which you're going to lose your whole house all at once. The sinkhole is going to advance on you inch by inch and take one wall at a time. And you're going to think, okay, well, maybe I can move back to the kitchen. Maybe I can move back to the bedroom. Maybe I can live in a tent in my garden. And at some point you have to get proactive. And unfortunately for me, I can't just fill the sinkhole, because, well, then the retaining wall is going to collapse and then we accelerate the process. I have to get a systemic change implemented by the municipality. And similarly, we're in a situation where in South Africa, there are very few organizations of the size and complexity enough to act on this situation. They have not actually been acting. I mean, they tell me that they are. They tell us that they are. But I look at some of these initiatives and I think, well, yeah, but you're in a position where it's not going to go that way. It's not going to. how should I put it? Your communities are going to be magnets for people who are sorry, there's another factor I've forgotten, a bit of context. That sort of migrant labor business that happened under apartheid, it continues now, except that it leaves these sedimentary layers of informal settlement. So I'll give you an example. There's a tiny little citrus growing community in Clanwilliam. Now that's been a beautiful small town in the middle of the Western Cape for hundreds of years. But since they ended the Group Areas Act in 1985, all of the farmers immediately went over to temporary employment agencies to hunt down workers in the Eastern Cape. And they picked on a town called Sterkspruit. I went into the informal settlement there, and I interviewed these people, and I tried to find who the oldest. Are there any settlers who have still been around since 1985? I managed to find one from the original sort of batch. Because what they do is they'll bring in the workers, and then when they gain a sense of security, they don't want to work as hard anymore. So the farmers just import a new batch next season, and then because of the tenure laws under the tenant sort of laws, which basically become squatters' rights, you don't want to let them stay on farm accommodation for longer than a certain amount. So they just sort of every 90 days or whatever it is, I can't remember the number, they just turf them out, and then they have to go set up a tin shack, you know? You've got this just growing informal settlement until it swamps the town. And then the presence of, once the white people become a minority, the high street completely changes. All the nice shops that bring in money and tourism into the area disappear, and it becomes one national supermarket chain and then a whole string of Somalis, like little corner shops selling rubbish and sweets. And the town becomes effectively a ghost town. And then they'll set up a little sort of mini mall, some sort of dried strip mall on the outskirts of town where a few white people in the area will go to buy things. And gradually the whole community slowly evaporates. And this process keeps going on, and there's no stable community almost anywhere. There are some places where you get some very impressive sort of cohesion and resistance to the forces of decay. You'll find incredible stories like places like Hammanskraal where they've managed to replace the water. You got local residents are supplying their own water and repairing water for the municipality while the politicians twiddle their thumbs. Or you've got places where like in Durban, the local neighborhood watches, where they had those big riots and attempted pogroms in 2021. They handily defeated huge mobs of violent people, and it's not equal everywhere, and a lot of people have left Durban after that. So again, you get this massive demographic change. And my town, the number of people who in my town who are politically engaged, because of the constant turnover of people as the economy dips and surges and all kinds of stuff, and then you get this influx of people from the other side of the country looking to escape the decay over there. You've maybe got sort of 9 or 10 people in the whole town who actually know what's going on at any level, and it's this destroys your capacity to really mobilize. So you have to look to these big organizations like Solidarity and AfriForum and so on. Then I think, well, okay, but do you have any concrete plans that will save any particular settlement? No, not really.
Okay. Well, how do you do that if all the settlements are so far apart and they're interspersed by these other ethnic settlements and stuff? Like, how do you... What is there? So from our perspective, from there like a very low, there are ways. Okay, so put a pin in that. From our perspective, the Western perspective, Trump came out and Elon's kind of agitating a little bit, and there's kind of like some salience about being like it's kind of the whites are embattled, but you're describing a problem that's so systemic. It's not even a racial problem. Race is a huge factor and all these multicultures, but you can't go in there, we're going to save the whites, or we're going to organize this thing. Like the whole country is, you're saying, is just, it's in it together too, and they're all tied together.
The worst part is there is a part of the there are two chunks of the country that could make it work if they could get away from, if they could break away.
Okay.
Because Natal would be very messy, possibly quite violent if it seceded for a number of reasons that kind of a long story. Basically, the ANC and the Zulu nationalists had a civil war that lasted for 13 years and took 20,000 lives. We tell everyone we had a peaceful political settlement, but it was incredibly bloody. So basically, if we split off black nationalism versus Zulu nationalism, it would become a live and violent question. But aside from that, if they broke away, they'd have the biggest port in Africa, very inefficient, but biggest port in sub-Saharan Africa, I should clarify. And they would have a functioning economy that was very sick and decayed and has lots of problems, but it would be functional. They've got enough access to minerals from the interior, from trade with South Africa. They'd have a very healthy agricultural sector. They've got a bit of a manufacturing sector as well. It would work, and there'd be cultural cohesion. And the thing is, the Zulus, because they have a sense of pride and self-confidence, they paradoxically have there is a sort of mode of interracial engagement that makes it a bit easier to get on, whereas in some other areas it's not quite as easy. But it's KwaZulu-Natal's a big paradox, and I'm not as familiar with that area as I'd like to be. But then you've got the Western Cape, where we are, if we broke away, I mean, there are economists who've looked at it and expect 6 to 7% annual growth rate. First world quality services, all kinds of stuff. And we would, white people are just shy of 20% rather than 7%. Colored people are the largest plurality, somewhere between 45 and 50% of the population. And so you've got this majority minority area that's sort of culturally fairly westernized, has a different sense of how politics is supposed to work, how everything else is supposed to work, has got a very high human development index. That could function on its own. The majority language here is Afrikaans as well, which gives you a different sort of cultural milieu. My family have been in this particular town in the Cape for 320 something years. Every generation in my family going back has lived here. So you've got these very sort of like rooted senses of place, and you've got parts of the country that could function. And like some of the municipalities, if you broke them up, would function extraordinarily well, because if you have a degree of cultural homogeneity in any particular electoral district, you immediately find things at least function according to a specified logic. Even if that's a bad logic, everyone can agree how it's supposed to go. And you've got stable coalitions in whatever local, provincial, or whatever council, But the big metropolitan municipalities up north were jerry-rigged so that they'd include large amounts of black people, so that the minorities could never elect anyone. And so you get these constantly collapsing coalitions that are just, it's impossible to run anything, and people loot on their way out, or the provincial government will take control of the municipality and then loot it and then hand it back. And you get these absolutely absurd situations that are completely unsustainable. But you split off, say, Pretoria from the rest of Tshwane municipality, and you've got a majority Afrikaner city that has the capacity to grow in leaps and bounds and function extraordinarily well. And the same can be said for Soweto. You break Soweto away from Johannesburg, and you've got a black nationalist enclave that is capable of expressing itself politically very well. And then you've got Johannesburg, which is now majority minority and can have a stable minoritarian liberal coalition, which would function very well for Johannesburg. But this is not happening now because we're all in this bloody box where no one can determine anything concretely.
Okay.
You know?
Why? Because one, the history, but also the ruling party, or the identity as a South Africa as a state is keeping it from fracturing and then remodeling itself.
Yeah, it's, unity is like this sort of almost superstitious religion here. And the problem is that everyone votes according to race. I mean, in every single election, the Democratic Alliance, which is the biggest opposition party, they have never gotten more than 4% of the black electorate. They're a left-wing party, sort of like slightly left of the Democrats in the United States. In order to retain the minority vote, they have to signal right-wing sort of sentiments and say, "Ooh, you got to be scared of the black radicals over there. They're destroying everything." But also trans rights, gay rights, free money for all of the for any black people who settle on the land. Oh, here, let's just decriminalize land invasions for 4 years. Like absolutely bananas town shit. So there, and I think that this has turned them into some very, very cynical, controlling people. Um, so they have a very odd combination, especially if you look at them at local politics. They can be extraordinarily vicious and corrupt, but they are such a tightly run ship. I mean, some of the corruption scandals that I picked up since I've been trying to do a tiny little newspaper, which is what I mostly do online. Some of them are really extraordinary. The cover-ups will last decades, and people who try and blow the whistle will have their lives destroyed in the most Kafkaesque fashion you can imagine. And yeah, and it's not even people who tell the public about it. The speaker of B2 municipality, which is Plettenberg Bay. They had a whatchamacallit, the speaker, like 6 months into the first time that they won that municipality, 2011, he blows the whistle on the mayor basically looting funds and helping his former ANC colleagues in the sort of state admin get hold of massive discretionary funds. And the speaker, just for trying to address the problem with the leadership inside the party, they went after him for a story about him not paying his party dues, expelled him from the party, and then spent the next 10 years litigating against him at a cost of millions of rands. And then they eventually lost the case. I mean, it's like the stamina they have for screwing with anyone who rocks the boat is extraordinary. And these are the nice guys that everyone's sort of like, hopey, changey, sort of whatever. So, yeah, it gives you, the closer you look at the problem, the more you despair, because it's just, even the good, decent, the really decent good guys in the party system are unfortunately like 2% of the vote, in my opinion. So I support a party called the Vryheidsfront Plus. Actually, they look to most people like this fairly radical right-wing party, but like on the inside, they're actually pretty liberal. They're like a Christian Democrat sort of party, right? If you know the European politics very much, they're very much like these sort of very middle of the road Christian Democrats, minority rights, very respectful, squeaky clean, very good at dealing with corruption. Unfortunately, very bureaucratic and tedious and committee focused, and so there's like strong and weak cases for them. They're not very sexy. They're not a very sexy party, but they're not corrupt, and they're fairly serious about the questions that face the country. Unfortunately, that doesn't get you very far because it's...
So in certain forms of political analysis, a strongman character can unify disparate groups, a conqueror of some sort. It seems like the British Empire imposed its will on this area. And then Right. And then Nelson Mandela, he made a cohesive government because of, at least from the outside, he had a brand, right? He had the brand unity, rainbow, a little bit of communism. We're going to unify. It doesn't seem like that is at all tenable, like, because there are so many different municipalities. Like, how do you conquer, who's the sovereign? And if there's not going to be a sovereign, then you have to go into some sort of patchwork. And then how do those, who regulates the trade between one city state and another city state? And can somebody police the roads? Can there be some sort of empire that makes sure that the space between these different groups is cohesive and safe for trade, so they can get along?
I mean, that's the problem. That's the problem. I think if we don't sort of, in some sense, fragment and go patchworky, if we don't, then we are headed for like a complete collapse. And I think that, because I don't see, there's no way to reform. I mean, when the apartheid government ended, when they abolished all of the apartheid laws and everything and unbanned ANC and everything in 1990, they'd already been on the reform process for 23 years. People inside this country don't realize this, but Henry Kissinger visited the country in 1976 and told Forster, "Game is up. You're imposing sanctions on Rhodesia now. Okay, we're going to keep your stalemate war with the Soviet Union in Angola going, but eventually that's going to wind to a close. And when that's done, you're done, And he immediately starts unwinding the color bars in skilled labor and making movement a bit freer and expanding black settlement areas in white South Africa. And then as time goes on, they try to amend the constitution to produce different ways of participating in the political system for, people who are neither white nor black, colored and Indians. And they wanted to sort of produce this kind of federated system where no one group has any kind of monopoly control on anything. It's based on the thoughts of a Dutch political thinker called Arend Leipert. And it's called consociationism. But systems like that, you can't do them gradually. You have to do it all at once. And that wasn't happening, and the reforms actually just kept looking to everyone like petty compromises that were really just entrenching power further, especially since they were cracking down with extraordinary policing powers at the same time. And you had 3 different intelligence agencies that weren't talking to each other and had dozens of secret departments inside them. So they were getting up to all kinds of violent criminal behavior, from drug dealing to secret death squads to just... it was just this massive sort of machine of chaos that ground to a halt in the end. And the ANC is going in the opposite direction. They're accelerating the process of transformation. And Donald Trump is coming in and saying no to them at a point where there is no big crisis that he can broadcast to the rest of the world through his allied media network. There's no big sort of shouty massacre of white people happening. If he pulled the trigger if he was in charge and pulled the trigger in 2021, when you had those, those big riots in support of Jacob Zuma that were mobilized using genocidal language and tried to target white and Indian neighborhoods, he may have had something. But it's too late. The moment's gone. And now all he's got to point to is the race laws, which everyone goes, yeah, but that's just diversity, equity, inclusion. Everyone has that, The counter argument against sort of complaints in this country is, well, you're not having genocide, so what are you complaining about?
That's the bar.
It makes it incredibly frustrating because the left have cornered this perfect trump card at the moment where they just go, well, where's this evidence of white genocide? And you kind of go, well, who's calling it genocide? Maybe a bunch of illiterate mukhus on the internet, but who's calling it white genocide? We're not. But everyone accepts the straw man premise, and that makes it impossible impossible to be taken seriously. You know, so it's a big struggle.
Wow.
It's a big struggle.
Wow. And leaving white men gone is not tenable. You're not going to, the whites aren't going to leave.
It's hard because I mean, like there are people who will take up the offer. You know, if they can afford to actually buy the plane ticket, which like for some of us is not even on the cards. I mean, I would not be able to feed myself in Europe or America on the income I have. You know, um, so like even the idea of, I mean, the idea of getting out of the country would even be sort of a bit of a challenge. Um, for those who can accept it, I think like there's a maximum of maybe like 15 to 20% who could get out of the country.
Wow.
And then you'd be losing your most skilled sort of labor, your most skilled people, and and a lot of people who are very sort of like sensible conservatives as well. So
Which would make it harder for the rest of
what
us. You.
make it harder for the rest of us because you've got a layer of sort of skilled middle class people who are very invested in the present system because they're all sort of, they haven't had their wings clipped by discrimination yet. They're doing all right. There's always people who can survive in any system and benefit from it.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't matter what the system is. There's always people who can survive and benefit from it. And I think the idea that it's all bad for everyone leaves you with the inability to deal with white people who actually enjoy and support the system.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they do exist. And, but it's not only that it's fundamentally unstable, it's that a coping mechanism for collapse, if it comes, if and when, you know, the formula is already there. Scapegoating already exists. Whose friend and whose enemy has been established very concretely and unambiguously by this political system. And so you kind of know what's coming down the pipeline, and you just look at it and you go, I mean, I have spent the last 4 years. I came down from, I left my master's degree after spending. I mean, look, until I got employed as a researcher, I was my only work experience was manual labor and occasional sort of bar duty. So this is the only sort of career I know, and I'm getting to the point already, not even 5 years in, where I'm sort of going, well, I've said everything I need to possibly say to anyone who's got the ability to act in great detail, and I'm not seeing any of it happening. And I sort of think, well, yeah, but what do I know about organizing a community? What do I know about running finances? What do I know about, security? I don't know anything about this. And to get something moving by myself just seems like such an incredible task. But then I look around and I go, well, do I have to acquire the ability to do this overnight because I'm not seeing anyone else moving? And it's the space is already sort of saturated. I mean, you've got all of these big organizations who have all of these coping mechanisms. To understand how saturated it is, if you look at the solidarity movement, and you have, God loves them. They're doing amazing work. They're some of the most truly impressive people, not there, but I still think there are things that they should be doing that they're not doing. And they've got, I think it's 570,000 members. Maybe if you treat those as households, right? Then you're looking at basically like the majority of the Afrikaner population will be, in some sense, a member of this, organization. Plurality, at least. And it's, when you look at political parties, everyone who's a minority, with the exception of the chunk who will vote for like the Freedom Front, they vote for the Democratic Alliance. And they vote for the Democratic Alliance because they think, well, if they don't win, then the ANC does. And I mean, to some extent, that's true. And so you've got this sort of left, sort of, I don't even know what left liberal means. They're sort of like a very orthodox globalist, would be the right way to put them. Like their party manifesto is literally the sustainable development goals. Like it's not, there's no nuance to them whatsoever. It's we will implement whatever the UN plans here in South Africa. Everything needs to be run by the UN. That is their mentality. They're absolutely like stark raving bananas, but
Well, yeah, but
because
does the
they've
UN have their
monopolized the
back?
space, the UN doesn't even think about them very much. I mean, it's the UN. The UN doesn't think about anything very much. They haven't thought hard about any problems since the 90s. And even then, it was debatable whether they were thinking seriously. I mean, it's just, whatever was done in the immediate post-war period was set in stone, and then it just sort of lurches forward slowly over all of the intervening stuff and changes some of the accounting. There's no, yeah, it's all unfortunately downstream of the Fabian Society. So,
Yeah.
Julian Huxley, etc.
Yeah. What is your, angling towards solutions or the real things that need to happen? You said something about fragmentation. How would that work out?
There's two ways you can do this. Unfortunately, with the Western Cape, there is no sort of incrementalist position. You have to use the electoral system. You have to force the DA to host a referendum in the province to get out. There's no other option. This makes the Western Cape both the easiest and most difficult option in different ways. In the rest of the country, there's a hell of a lot of low-hanging fruit where you can grow local autonomy. So for traditional leaders in KwaZulu-Natal, if they focused on developing they have an enormous degree of autonomy in the traditionally governed regions. And they're sort of spotted all over the province, right? They have enormous control over their own little fiefdoms. If they focused on a common perspective of building capacity there, they could do absolutely extraordinary things. They could position themselves as, tradition is the future kind of stuff. They could amass enormous power. I mean, the Zulu King holds a territory that's about the size of Wales under his private fiefdom, and under an entity known as the Ingonyama Trust. And the possibilities are truly enormous. The amount of development and just stuff they could do that they're not doing. Amazing. It's the sky's
Or are they
really the
hamstruck?
limit.
Why are they not doing that?
It's sort of, I think there's a problem of inertia. There's also a lack of communication between the intellectual communication. So the Zulu nationalist sphere is not the most energetic sort of area of political thought. There's this lack of confidence around traditional institutions where they kind of think, well, we're stuck in the past, where's the future, and so they end up looking at all of these Republican institutions in the rest of the country, and whereas I think that they really are the future and they should establish themselves as the prestige entity in the region, and that will change things very rapidly. Because one of the things about African communities is that things sort of, nothing seems to happen for a long time, and then boom, something really big happens. And I think it's a lot like there's a lot of avalanche potential there. And the king is still incredibly revered, even by black nationalists who are against the sort of Zulu nationalist sort of tendency. So if he sort of goes up a chair and says, "Okay, now it's time," they would go, even if it meant violence, it would happen. So there's possibility there, but that means for 5 or 10 years or whatever it is, they have to sit down and develop their local areas and demonstrate that they can run things better than the ANC or NK run municipalities can, right? Then The Afrikaners, they're the other group that's got sort of potential. I mean, there's also the Bafokeng in the Northwest Province, but that's more complicated, and I don't know enough about them. The Afrikaners, there are a number of settlements where there's this funny legal loophole, and I won't go into it because it's going to bore you to tears. Essentially, you can break the BEE chain at the local level with the right sort of maneuvers. Completely non-violent. There is a way of actually breaking the stranglehold that Black economic empowerment regulations have over the local economy. And then through local business coordination, you can start to integrate land and economic activity and completely autonomize your own town. And because, I mean, there's de facto segregation of housing and settlement still. So it's not like it would involve massive purges or anything. It's just, you increasingly hold things in common and you increasingly make localized decisions, and it'll develop. And that sets the stage for when things do collapse. You've got room to maneuver because who's going to enforce the law on you? And you can develop these trading nodes, stable trading nodes all across the country. You can repair roads without worrying about the state intervening. You can build rails if you really want to sort of get really gung-ho about it 30 years down the line.
Does it need foreign investment? Is that what?
I don't think so. There is one project I have in mind that I see as necessary that would involve foreign investment, but that would... It'll be a tough sell because it's a bit eccentric. It's like this. It doesn't matter. The point is, you can. There's some areas where you can build local autonomy. There's some places where you could start new settlements from scratch, and there's some places where you can break the municipal boundaries. And there's actually a plausible mechanism to do so. Even on ethnic grounds, because we have something called the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act, which means that if an administrative organ of the state tries to do one thing for one group of people, it can't deny that to another, or you can't be arbitrary. And they have divided municipalities explicitly on the basis of ethnicity before. And so if Victoria, for example, decided that they were being excluded somehow from how things are run in Tshwane municipality, then they could say, excuse me, I think we actually need our own place. Just put us up, please. Or if Soweto wanted to sort of take advantage of its Black consciousness heritage and position itself as a sort of new Black city of some kind, it could do that. There are these provisions which are just like sort of there and nobody's looking at them. No one that I know of. I'm sure somebody else has seen them because they're not that obscure. But it's like, I sit here and look at this, and all of this stuff is possible. It's within the powers of existing civic organizations to do all of this. And not one of them are making a move yet so far. Aaron Zwirt has recently offered some hope with his new thing. I don't know how that's going to go because it's like literally days old. So it remains to be seen to what extent it'll, because it sounds like he's going to be mainly leaning on research and advocacy rather than action, like activism. That's the word. So I don't know.
It's really difficult. I've been talking. Well, you told me that you're going to speak your piece, and then I get to.
I'm so sorry. I go really. I talk way too much.
No, I enjoy it thoroughly. Me. But it's difficult with this distance that we're speaking over. But I'm trying to search for a vision that you could broadcast that would mobilize people. In this state in modern Western history, of this place, unity, diversity, inclusion, and equity are the unifying principles. They are the story. It's really difficult to sell particularism, self-determination, isolationism to a certain extent, exclusion.
Yeah.
It's all the opposite. It's the opposite
It
of
is.
diversity,
Yes.
but it's actually a broader diversity. It's a broader inclusion because you're allowing
Yeah.
people to self-determine. But it's such a difficult vision to make an umbrella that everybody can agree to, and so the umbrella it's collapsing. This umbrella of unity. It's collapsing in front of your eyes, and even the outside interests. I mean, we haven't even spoken about China, like material interests, economic interests. America could strut its stuff and do some value stuff, but like you said, we are the standard bearers of diversity, inclusion, melting potism. From our perspective, we can't really translate it in other than white victimization, which doesn't even sell well over here, right?
Yeah.
So
It's
how
silly.
do you get support from the outside, a soft British Empire kind of thing, to stabilize or to ensure a transition so that people can willfully self-organize and fragment and patchwork, right? Like, where's the vision? The broadcast. There's
It's
all
very
these
hard. I
details.
mean, I think
Yeah.
very hard. President Natal and um, the Western Cape, if the Americans chucked, if like someone in the American deep state chucked me $20 million, I could get it done in 5 years. But the money isn't there. It's
Well,
if
China
the
certainly thinks that there's money to be had, right?
yeah, but I mean, look, they've got a similar sort of like slow motion mentality to the Africans in one sense, in that they're happily sort of gaming all of our local laws. Chinese are legally regarded as black for the purposes of black economic empowerment.
Oh,
So,
they won't put
and
blacks on
they
their movie
regularly,
posters, but they'll say they're black when it comes to getting a leg up.
right. And well, remember that the Japanese were honorary whites, the Chinese were not, under the old system. And until the late 70s, black Americans were considered honorary whites because our system justified itself ideologically through culture rather than genetics.
Yeah.
Which so we've got some bizarre things. I mean, because a lot of white people have had racial admixture, so they sort of like, well, we'll just pragmatically draw the line somewhere. So there's this very weird. It's a very weird system going back that's based in the theology of Abraham campus and all kinds of stuff like that. The former prime minister of the Netherlands, who was a big at the turn of the century, was a big theologian. That's a major diversion. Sorry, but no, I mean the thing is, for the interior of the country, for the Afrikaners in the interior of the country who kind of have to do it themselves. That's the hard part. How is America going to lean in and decide, okay, we're now going to get into the nitty gritty of municipal level politics with you? Like, are you kidding me? There's not even the most ambitious American sort of imperialist would ever try and think on that level. So it's, that's a problem the Afrikaners have to solve themselves. And they totally can. That's the worst part is I'm staring at it, it's like, it's actually a cheap modular there's actually I've published stuff about this. Mm-hmm. I've outlined this strategy.
Well, it seemed like Ernst was leaning into that with Afriforum.
The thing is that they go a certain distance, but there's stuff that let me explain, because now I have to get tedious about it. So they do things like they've got neighborhood watches. They're replacing some of the fire services. They provide emergency water, emergency response units. Sometimes they help with skills training. They help with finding jobs. They help with education. There's like all of these different things that they're doing, and it's incredibly impressive. However, the one ingredient that they would need would involve them getting to business. Now, the guys who are most likely primed to do this are also part of the same movement, more or less, although they've got more autonomy. Is a group called Sakeliga. That's sort of like, translated directly would be like the business league. So some incredibly bright people running that. running that outfit, including one of my favorite intellectuals, not even in South Africa, but overall, is Louis Malan, wrote this fantastic book called "There's No Supreme Constitution." He somehow he's 65 and he's a jurist, and he somehow managed to come to the same conclusion as a lot of the neo-reactionaries without ever touching on the same intellectual touchstones. He refers to, and he basically ends up saying, well, the paper constitution isn't real. It all comes down to interpretation, bureaucratic inertia, and so on and so forth. And then, because of our particular circumstance, instead of going to, well, we need a sovereign who's going to rule over everyone, he goes, well, we can't do that. So what we need to do is we just need to move straight past that to patchwork. And so they have some serious thought there as well. And what I'd love to do, because at the moment, because I'm getting so sort of claustrophobic about the situation, is I've looked at trying to find a way of implementing one of the elements of the plan myself. That involves getting into labor bargaining councils and building up a business consulting entity. For reasons that are too painfully complicated to explain here. I think I'll probably be chairing my first disciplinary hearing in our labor system is very strange, but you basically can become like this mini judge that handles firing situations with minimal training. And so I'm going to be starting to do that in a week or two, so that I can build up an income stream and a client list, so that I can start moving into business consulting, and then from there I can start targeting tenders and start moving in on trying to cancel black economic empowerment through the procurement mechanism of the state. And
wow,
because I don't see anyone doing this, and I'm like, someone has to do something. I don't know what I'm doing, but let me try. And that was my mentality as well. It's like I didn't see anyone saying certain things, so I started saying them online. And I've been employed to say them for a while until no one was listening to me anymore. So now I'm just going to do them. And it's the thing is that it feels to some people like it's too aggressive or takes too long. There's not immediate fruits. It's not very sexy. There's no populist element that you can sort of lean on. It doesn't stir anyone's emotions talking about procurement or labor law. And so someone who's got the patience for this has got to do it. And I don't know, I'm going to try.
So if patchwork happens, let's just say 25 years, let's just be conservative, 25 years, some collapse happens that facilitates it. What would form these different groups? What would be the line that's drawn? Would it be culture, ideology, certain sorts of behavior? If you adopt this ideology and you perform within it, then you can be a part of our clan? Or would it be racial, ethnic?
I think it'd be a mixture of things. So a lot of it would be emergent. The reason I mean, for my own sort of the communities that I intersect with, because I was born English speaking, part Afrikaans. My wife is Afrikaans. My children are being raised speaking Afrikaans. I've worked for Afrikaans organizations for the past few years. I feel a strong sense of attachment to both the Cape and the Transvaal communities, and I feel a sense of sort of attachment through heritage to all of it as a minority. So I can't really at a sort of in my heart I can't let go of any of it, and it's so those are the things I'm going to be I work on, because if you're English, there's no real sort of rebel potential. And it's not just because of the generally more liberal and left-leaning attitudes of English South Africans. It's also because there's no organizing capacity that couldn't immediately be squished by the state. Because if you organize yourself as English, then there's not enough sort of cultural factors to say, well, you can organize along cultural lines. There's nothing strictly speaking against the law there, but you can't organize against along racial lines. So it becomes sort of this area where only the Afrikaners can really do this because their culture is very recognizably different. So it ends up being a thing simply by having organizations that are culturally Afrikaner, filters out everyone else. And it gives them the capacity to organize as a community. And there's enough, the average capital access there is still enough that they can do stuff. Colored communities can't do this because there's not enough capital amongst them. Indian communities too small and too disparate. The black communities are too dependent on the state. So the Afrikaners are, broadly speaking, the only ethnicity that are capable of resisting the state. And so they have to make a move. And if they can save themselves, then to a greater or lesser extent, they will cushion the blow of the state coming apart. But because the thing is, it's not going to explode and, be messy. It's just going to grind down and become more and more awful. And there's got to be some sort of counterweight to that can pick up some of the economic slack. Otherwise, it's a complete disaster. And
do you see possibly a return of Afrikaners to the seat of power then through that process of?
No, what I see is a situation where you really want a system where you have de facto, you have a veto over what the state does. You can't force the state to do anything. I don't like. I think the idea that Afrikaners ought to dominate the country is somewhat. It's not really what you want. You do want communities to have their own path, and putting artificial sort of shackles on them is not going to get the best out of the situation. You can't be at loggerheads with people who are your neighbors. Eventually that's going to come back to bite you.
Well, yeah, but if the Afrikaners are establishing these nodes, these rich, economically powerful nodes, and these trade networks, then those trade networks, they could prove themselves as the people who can organize other societies and just understanding through history that there's certain lines you don't need to cross. All you need to do is protect trade and facilitate trade. And that takes off the pressure between really low performing societies and high performing societies, because that difference is what creates friction. But if you're organizing, you're ruling them by organizing them, but you're not oppressing them because you're allowing them to, I don't know.
I mean, the way I would look at it is that you wouldn't end up organizing them either. You would, because there would also be local autonomy there de facto, whatever you do. Right? Yeah. Even now, I mean, the traditionally governed areas have a great deal of autonomy on paper and in reality. They don't take advantage of it, but as much as they could, but they have it. Some of them do, like the Royal Bafokeng up there near the platinum mines are making a mint. And they're starting to move into like proper development of their own area, and that's great. I think that should keep going. I think that the state will never completely disappear; it'll always be in place to some extent, and so it's not a situation where you're taking over. It's just you call more of the shots, not all of them. And so I think the balance, having a bit of balance, where you also don't try and take sovereignty. I actually think it's not in our advantage to take sovereignty, because having because when the state becomes more and more dysfunctional, but remains de jure the organ through which all sort of law and administration passes, you shield yourself from a lot of the globalist policies that the technocratic globalist policies that I think are going to keep going. After Trump's gone. I mean, they're still sort of going while he's here. All of this digital ID stuff and so on. I'm not much of a fan of, but
And those oligarchical interests that you brought up very early in our conversations, they are tied to the globalists. So they wouldn't side. You can convince them to support this patchwork.
some of them are. Most of them are just more. They don't care as long as they're making a buck,
Yeah.
and they'll have more latitude to make money as the state gets weaker, provided they know how to play their cards right. So they're not going anywhere. I don't think they're going anywhere. And I mean, if you understand what the decay looks like, you'll notice that there are these pockets where the really truly wealthy live in splendid isolation. There's a development nearby. Yeah, I live in the old part of my town, but nearby there's a massive gated development where they have like polo grounds and stuff like that. Like it's another world completely. And these tiny little pockets here and there they're going to remain like that regardless of what happens. They can sort themselves out. I'm worried about the average guy who, has got to provide the bulk of connective tissue. And, if you can't save the middle, then the whole thing just detaches. And so yeah, I mean, the thing is, this sort of de facto this devolution of power, I think that's actually going to be the salvation of not just the local economy, but the broader continental economy. So if that works out, then a lot of things are going to be okay that wouldn't be okay otherwise. You have to make it happen. Because at the moment, I mean, I describe people moving across the country every couple of years because the economy is unstable. If you have no permanent settled population in a given town, then it's just you can't get things done. You can't repair things. You can't hold on to things.
Nobody cares. Yeah.
So and so it's not, the trend is not going to happen on its own. Somebody has to actually add energy into the mix, to reverse the entropy. Yeah.
What from your point of view, just for I don't want to say mental health perspective, but for the sake of your soul, do you identify with a larger network or group, or how do you plug into your society? You obviously care about your country and your countrymen, but you give me the impression that you're rather independent in your thinking and in your action. But I'm wondering if you're tied, other than just genetically and through marriage.
It's difficult. No, you're right. It is difficult because I don't feel a great sense of connection with the local churches. I don't. It's difficult. I mean, it's like there'll be nice people there, but it's like I don't feel quite spiritually at home at any of them, at any of these sort of Protestant churches, and the few Orthodox churches. I mean, because I've been sort of slightly interested in them. Well, I say slightly. I've been fairly interested in them, but they're kind of far away, and the organizations that I contribute to are. Like I support what they're doing, but I get so frustrated with them. Political parties are difficult, very difficult, and I don't know. But I've always been like this. I think I've always been. I've always found myself at odds with wherever I am. I'm not sure why that is. And it's just, I reckon at a certain stage in my life, like, if I want things to be different, if I want things to go my way, I have to start making them.
Hmm.
And I don't know how to do that, but it starts with taking a swing at it.
Hmm.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. The story, the South Africa story, is so complex, and there's so many different aspects. I spoke with you now for what, hour and a half, 2 hours with Ernst, and you can just feel these huge gaps in the story. And then the commenters come in. You didn't talk about this. You didn't talk about that. Well, you can only talk about so many, so much of this. But getting getting an insider's perspective on this from the outside, I can kind of use it as a morality tale on liberalism and a historical tale. But it is a foreign country to me. You guys are very far away. We speak the same language. We probably have, you admitted before we started recording that you're a avowed ex-leftist, ex-liberal. We still share like a Western perspective, but the way that you are positioned way over there, like there's a similarity, but I don't understand. I mean, I just want to honor the difference of understanding worldview and then your position. You can't afford an airplane ticket with you and your family to Mississippi or whatever, without
It's funny you say that.
give, send, go or something going on.
It's funny you say that. My maternal grandfather was American,
Okay.
and mother and her sister qualified for American citizenship. My aunt applied, I think, in 1985. So she has American citizenship. My mother applied in 1989. And for some reason that she can't explain, my mother was sort of feeling, in many ways, she's kind of a meek person. Although you can display some really, truly paradoxical bursts of courage sometimes. But she was very meek in this scenario. The consulate actually confiscated her father's papers from her. They didn't return them, and didn't supply her with a passport. Wouldn't let her apply. And so that's that.
That sounds fishy.
It was very, I don't know. I think, it does sound fishy. But I mean, what are you going to do? You can't, like, are you going to go to the concert and ask them, hey, can you tell me why you did that? Why one of your colleagues did that? 35 years ago, 36 years ago. Like, it's not going to happen. So, I don't know. I just had I mean, it's just weird. In another world, I could have ended up as an American citizen, done that instead. But no, I'm here. And I'm not really going anywhere.
Yeah.
So,
well, what are you working on? You said you run kind of a newspaper, and you smiled, so it's probably a
it's cool.
Substack, but
no, it's got its own little website, and it's called the Cape Independent. I haven't put anything out today or this weekend for a variety of reasons, but I try to put out stuff at least daily. And it'll cover news focused on the Western Cape and politics that focuses on minority rights, minority interests, things like that. I don't tend to do a lot of the shouty sort of news, so it'll be. I'll sometimes dive into detail and recently did an article on like the desalination plants and what's going on there in Cape Town. They have a problem with ocean pollution that goes back to 1893 that rears its head every decades, and they're trying to get desalination plants installed, but the last contract there got cancelled because the water pollution levels are a bit too high. But the city starts attacking any scientists who criticize them. So, because it's better than Johannesburg, it's not literally crumbling into dust. Everyone
Right.
sort of goes, "Oh no, they're wonderful. We would never vote for anyone else." So
Huh.
being better the ANC is not much of a standard.
Yeah.
Um, no, so I mean, like I get stuck into that kind of nonsense a
Yeah.
lot, and then I'll try and write at least one or two big sort of meaningful pieces. Or um, and it does okay. I think I've got. I mean, for South Africa, it does okay. It's not by international standards. The readership would be pitiful. I mean, we get I think about 9 or 10,000 unique viewers a month.
Hmm.
Um, so that's like a small town paper back in the 1970s.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, it's it's not glamorous, but I think I do okay. I've been running it for just over a year, um, and we'll see how that goes. But other than that, I do sort of piecemeal research. So I've done like a bit of cheap stuff for company in Dubai, startup in Dubai that's
Hmm.
trying to put together like in-house training materials for AI, and then I've done
Yeah.
uh, these big research projects for the civic organization, and so on. So that's what's been paying the bills recently. But I'm moving out of it because it's very unstable. It's a very small pool of clients. That means that you
Yeah.
know but I'm moving into something else, and I'm trying to make it something that's going to lock in with some of the bigger picture sort of improvement schemes.
Hmm.
We'll
Hmm.
see how it goes.
And you have a excellent documentary on dispensation, or at least South African
Oh
history.
Lord, I forgot about that.
You forgot about that? It's
Yeah,
so
I did.
wonderful.
Oh, thanks. I did those. I did those when I was sort of unemployed and wasn't swamped with like kids and all kinds of other shenanigans. I was in the Netherlands and I'd just finished my master's degree, and no one would hire me. So like I was doing something in the meantime while I wait for responses on LinkedIn. And I never finished it. I had planned up to like 7 parts. So there's like another one where I was gonna go explaining the ideological landscape in South Africa, which I wrote the script and I recorded a thing, and I was trying to find clips for it, and then
Yeah.
it's the half finished project sitting on some hard drive somewhere.
Yeah.
And the last one was going to be sort of, okay, here's what's happened since 2013. Here's where the country's going as a whole, and here are all the different ways it can break up or go wrong or whatever. And so much has happened since then, and I've looked into so many new nooks and crannies in
Yeah.
country's history that I sort of think, well, where the hell would I take that? I mean, would it have to be another 3 parts or another 5 parts? I mean, and it becomes daunting because it's
Yeah.
when I had all the time in the world and I was a single guy living alone. It's like I can put as many hours into this as I want. Now I've got 2 tiny children, a wife, we've got jobs and projects all over the place, not all of which make money, unfortunately. But
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Well, it might be time to
well,
republish that, repost it, maybe put it on X or something like that. There's a lot of,
yeah, I'll tweet it up and say, hey guys, you remember when I did this?
yeah. I mean, it's a piece of history, and it's about history, so it aged well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I my favorite guy to watch. I actually still watch Adam Curtis documentaries.
Hmm.
If I'm feeling very stressed and I've got time to myself, I'll rewatch his old documentaries because there's a sort of almost peaceful, hypnotic, dreamlike quality to his documentaries.
Hmm.
And I mean, he talks about a lot of bleak stuff, but there's this sort of feeling of flying over it at a great distance,
Hmm.
and there's almost like a sense of peace you get from like looking at things from very far above, no matter how sort of dizzyingly horrible they are at a granular
Hmm.
level.
Hmm.
And I love the cadence and the way he described ideas. Um, and so I tried to copy some of that, and also like the way that you know the visual language is always very great. He doesn't always just sort of do this literal thing of, we are talking about this, let me show you this now. It's always, there's like something that'll have a symbolic gesture in there.
Yeah.
Capture the mood.
Yeah.
He was very good at that. I love it. I wish I had access. I wish if I could do his job, that'd be lovely.
Hey, why
That'd
not?
be lovely.
The opportunity awaits.
Yeah. But first, I don't know. I can't let go of the stuff I'm involved in now. I feel,
Yeah.
You have this overwhelming sense of duty because I mean, my family going back, I used to be in politics generations ago, and it was all in my great grandmother's day. So we had the deputy prime minister under Jan Smuts was Jan Hendrik Hofmeyr, which is my great grandmother's cousin. Then one of her uncles founded the Afrikaans language movement. Also, he founded what eventually became a nationwide secret society, Bond. He started it initially in 1878 in the town just down the road here, as a way of protesting the brandy tax in the Cape Colony. And it sort of always tickles me that because Afrikaners are known for drinking brandy. It's like a big thing. They drink brandy. And tickles me very much that the whole Afrikaans nationalist movement originated in an organization that protested brandy tax. And so, yeah, also, I mean, my great-great-grandfather, he was the member of parliament for this town, and his voice is the first voice recorded in South African Hansard.
Huh.
And the founder of the Afrikaner nation, as we understand it, Peter Tiff, was born on my family farm, which is over there. And it's still in the hands of the Retief family. His brother, Francois' direct line, is still in charge. So my cousin who owns that farm. So there's this, for me, it's not, I don't feel it as, like, I almost feel like I don't have the option of letting go. And the other reason I feel obligation is because I played a part, very, very tiny part, possibly even infinitesimal, but I still played a part in one of the most poisonous movements to ever face of this country, and that was the Fallist movement. You sort of know the evergreen stuff, right? But you had your sort of version of woke, right? For us, in my generation, it was started out as sort of like a decolonization thing, and I knew a lot of the key players on a personal level due to a number of odd little coincidences. And I joined early on because I sort of believed in that whole sort of Rousseauian vision of society where human evil comes through constraint by, money and institutions and silly things like that. And so man at his most free and unencumbered is man at his best and most natural. And this movement, when it burst forth, it rejected all the political parties. And so it refused to have like an official leader. And so but that kind of actually accelerated the dominance of the most virulent ideas. And I got worried early on that it might end up fighting, because I talked to a few people and there were some very, very sort of hard pro-genocide types hanging around the fringes. I was concerned about this, and I thought, oh, well, down the line, this could end up with, bringing about. But very shortly, it just turned out that everybody involved wanted genocide, and they wouldn't. And it's not just that they were chanting these slogans, like you see on the television. It's that you could sit them down and have a long conversation where they'd explain to you why it's a logical necessity that you and everyone that you're related to deserves to die. And I was seized by the most profound paranoia and for a long time, because the greatest sin you can commit, if you've got a liberal or left wing this sort of tendency, the worst thing you can think in South Africa is that black people are truly capable of evil. If you entertain what is known as swart gevaar, the black peril, sort of like like old apartheid propaganda, like the blacks are going to come and kill us and so on. For me, it was really hard to wrestle with, because I thought, I am clinically insane and I'm evil for thinking that this should be taken seriously. And that was a very long internal turmoil for me. And it was hard because I had lecturers who would force this stuff down my throat. It's like, this country has to end up like Haiti. That is the model of revolution we need here. And how dare you disagree with me in your marked essay? Here you go, F. And so, I mean, like, I had a hard time dealing with it, because I was scared of really, I mean, so some of my first steps out of this sort of guilt feelings was Jordan Peterson, and your own coverage of what happened at your university was, for me, actually quite impactful, because in some of the ideas overlap quite considerably, and it sort of gave me something to sort of think on. And I mean, eventually you end up sort of reading people like Curtis Yarvin and whatever, and reconsidering some of the big ideas like democracy and progress and so on. But I think for me, it was first sort of recognizing that there is a way of challenging these extreme left-wing sort of visions without condemning yourself to becoming some kind of evil, hateful person. That was difficult, because because I mean, one of the things you'll notice is how very short the distance is between something becoming consensus at a university level and it becoming consensus at a national administrative level, And so I was very worried, and I still am worried, because all of my peers are now moving into positions of leadership and influence. Mm-hmm. They're completely certifiable lunatics, and no, it's difficult to watch. I sort of thought, well, I supported these people. I mean, you might have seen occasionally someone sharing a photograph of like a black guy with the word "kill all whites" on the back of his shirt. I knew that guy. He's an opera singer, and a fairly talented one. He used to go by the name Slovo Magida. I can't remember what his real first name is. He took on Slovo as a kind of ironic nod. White men can be black genocidaires too, Mm-hmm. Joe Slovo was the sort of Lithuanian Jewish leader of the South African Communist Party. No, so you get all of these characters I met there, these strange stories where all of them had suffered some extraordinary trauma, like losing a parent, sometime either in their childhood or briefly before they came to university. All of the people who became leaders in this movement. They all came from very strange backgrounds. And then they all sort of into this sort of internal turmoil and angst gets poured all of these revolutionary ideas from people like Mahmoud Mamdani and Frantz Fanon, and it was bizarre to watch. You watch these people who you're having you're just having an ordinary debauched university experience with a few weeks before, and it's like someone passed a current through the room, and all of the filings lined up into scary big knives. I mean, guys you generally share a beer with, and then a couple of days later they're coming by your house to boast are they getting military training at some stupid camp somewhere. You're on a list, some shit. I mean, it's a lot of it's sort of tough talk by sort of young twerps, and it's not going to go anywhere. But when you're one yourself, you don't know what to make of it.
Yeah.
So, no, it was a very formative experience, and these ideas are not consensus, and you've got like the entire legal department of the University of Pretoria is run by these ideas. And you read, there's a group of guys, Modiri and Morse. And I mean, these people have taken aspects of traditional African thinking and worked it into this black nationalist concept. There are things that are not perceived and not written about because they're seen as too dark to touch on.
Yeah.
There's a feature when people talk about Ubuntu, the word translates roughly to something like humanness or personhood, right? And people talk about it as meaning, oh, everyone's interdependent and we all love each other in one, happy, huggy, kissy circle where we're all humanity and everything. That's Desmond Tutu's Christianized spin on it. Underlying that is actually a set of it's a tribal ethic. It reflects how you show solidarity within your group. And the limits of this are defined linguistically. So in Bantu languages, whether you speak Tswana or whatever, I learned a little Setswana when I was up north, and I encountered this really weird phenomenon. So now you've got, how you've got like genders in French or German or whatever.
Yeah.
They, strictly speaking, those are referred to at higher level as noun classes. Now in Setswana, you've got 12 noun classes. In Zulu, you've got 22. So it gets quite complicated. And they're therefore referring to like plurals. The environment itself, like around you, has a pronoun. The subject of a sentence has like a noun class. You've got inanimate objects and animals are referred to with a noun class, and human beings are referred to with another noun class. And what I noticed is that when they're talking about people who are not in their group, they're referred to with the noun class that is used for animals and inanimate objects. Mm-hmm. Not even when they're speaking with any kind of animosity, it's just standard. That's how you do it. Mm-hmm. And even when they don't do this strictly with you, like in Xhosa or Zulu, they will never refer to you as a white person with the word they use for a human being, for a person. Mm-hmm. Black person is person, and a white person is umlungu. They're like, these are discrete ontological categories. And some of these black nationalists sort of, or as they call it, Azanian critical theory now. Some of these thinkers are now incorporating these ideas into their philosophy more explicitly as they gain more confidence. And they'll tell you straight up, this is, you are not actually human, so you're not part of this ethic. You do not have the spiritual quality that defines you as truly human. Mm-hmm. And I mean, people make much of that little sort of funny clip that you saw. I actually know that rapper who was on that podcast who said we're all Neanderthals or whatever. I've met him and talked to him a couple of times. I think he does it for attention. He's actually more easy to talk to than he comes across. But I think he's actually, in some ways, he's actually an okay guy. I think he just likes being provocative. But the guys at the universities, they're the ones I worry about, because it's the totalizing concept is literally, they incorporate all of that sort of black Hebrew, some of the historical revision you'd expect from a black Hebrew Israelite. Mm-hmm. You'll find amongst these crowds, like, actually, black people invented everything and white people stole everything. Like, completely totalizing, through the looking glass kind of thing. And it's not uncommon. And so I don't know what's going to happen because the graduation of this generation into the halls of power coincides with the window of time that the country is going to be falling apart economically.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel a sense of urgency that I don't see in a lot of other people. And yet at the same time, I don't know what I'm doing and I don't have any fancy people backing me. So I sit here in this, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. It's a hard position to find yourself in because there's at a certain point, because I'm not alone anymore, I have a family. Is a point
Yeah.
at which if the temperature gets too high and I'm not making like hectic progress, I have to find a way of pulling the plug and getting out of the country. And I'm sort of there's there's a sense at which I'm playing chicken with my own destiny to some sense. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to make a difference, and yet I can't. I feel too much of a pressure to do anything not to do anything. Yeah, I don't know what to say. It's a hard sort of thing to square away. Um, Sorry, that got a bit sort of weird at
It's
the end. I think.
your historical position at the end of colonialism, kind of the very, very, very tail end of empire.
So the ultimate twilight of the West, sort of.
Yeah. It's kind of a frontier. You can look at it as apocalyptic, and you can look at it as a frontier, but it really depends on so many contingencies.
Does give me vertigo sometimes a little bit. I think it's very hard because I'm watching as I watch the news. My parents, for example, live in England, and I went to high school in England for 4 years, and you studied in the Netherlands. I've seen a bit of France. I've seen a bit of Italy, um, and you can see and feel like you can feel the decay. It's like a great museum that no one's looking after. And you look at America, and I've never been to America, but you see enough of it on the news and on the internet, and you read history books, and right up until about the middle of the 20th century, even right up into in some if you look in the right places, even in movies into the 90s, you can see a sense of continuity where people are still carrying the torch. And at some point, nobody's carrying the torch anymore, and you can't pinpoint a point at which it's been dropped. But it isn't being carried anymore. The light isn't there, and I sit down here, all the way at the southern tip of Africa, and I'm staring a certain kind of future in the face. And it's very, very hard to sort of. I don't even know how to articulate the question, but it's like we're standing on the edge of really a truly profoundly vast unknown territory in the future that is unlike anything before. Not only because of dwindling spiritual resources of the civilization as a whole and the waning physical vitality of the people that comprise it, but also because of the way in which material factors like artificial intelligence are completely overwhelming natural human ability to reach for something more in themselves. How do you compete and aspire to something as a person when you're about to be completely rendered irrelevant by something that is not alive or sentient or conscious in any way. There's too much to humble you now, and and for me, someone who doesn't have prestige in society or the wealth or the power to indulge, my sort of, should I put it, my more quixotic tendencies. It's there. I often struggle to articulate this, but there's a really profound sense of isolation and bewilderment and just diminishment. I mean, it's almost like the universe is busy humiliating you some way. And I look at, you get, the funny thing is, as soon as I think of that, the next thought is, if you make some remark like this about, the twilight of your civilization, there's some black South African is waiting to comment with, some kind of, you're never great to begin with, whatever. And I sort of think to myself, you're in the same boat. Do you realize the plug is being pulled on everyone? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I don't know what, there's a sort of, how should you put it? If you see your life as having any meaning beyond the next meal, then there's a sense in which you have to at the same time go, I know that I can't control this stuff and I have to push against it anyway. And it's bizarre. I think of the sort of I think of sort of someone of my father's generation who's sort of stuck into this. They've worked their way up through a system and attained a level of comfort and prosperity, and or even someone sort of in between. Me and my father, like perhaps yourself, where you're sort of in midstream. Well, that system that still sort of functions enough, and you earn your living, not you personally, because you're earning your living from the meaning making sort of part of it. But someone who does something like more banal, like they're an accountant or they're a shop fitter or they're a doctor or whatever. You've got the task in front of you, and then occasionally you'll look overhead and see all of this insane stuff that's happening that is truly terrifying. Like this colossal wave looming overhead. And how much of your life, what I would sort of want to know is, those who are not staring at it every day and trying to find a way of going under or over the wave, how do you live? How do you shut that out? How do you not make decisions based on these sort of enormous tectonic forces around you? Because I've sort of thought of nothing else for 10 years.
Yeah. Well, the Christian civilization has always had, since its inception, the notion of an apocalypse, the notion of the return of Christ, the end of days, the millennium. And I think with that looming over their heads, they still built cathedrals, trade networks, the highest achievements of all sorts of arts and engineering. And they still studied the globe and studied nature and sought to look into the eyes of God, and at least his handiwork and his reflection there. And I think part of having that judgment looming overhead stirred them towards that greatness. But without some sort of personal spiritual connection to interpret the disaster as a test of soul, without that feedback loop of, well, God created me and put me here. So I might as well worship God and fight like hell while I'm here.
Exactly.
Then the meaning has a circuit, because you're not just building a cathedral for your own to test your own greatness. You're building a cathedral for the generations and to point them to that higher point of view.
It's funny. I know there's a slight diversion from such a grand point, but when I think about the cathedrals and everything. I remember when I was like a teenager and I was sort of into all the whole new atheist thing and everything. I always thought it was like a very witty observation that they're supposed to be humble and not materialist, and they build these fancy cathedrals. And it occurs to me how stupid that is now, because what you're doing is you're taking your earthly wealth and you're using it to honor God, but not by burning it and destroying it, turning it into something that draws others into God's house as well. And there's nobody who can like directly materially benefit from the beauty that is being created in the church. You know, it's something that everyone is sort of pouring their heart into, that is spilled out over everyone. And I mean, even if you're the most brute materialist, at a certain point you have to look up and ask, and sort of think, surely you feel differently when you walk amidst things like that than when you walk amongst the dreary tower blocks, or in my case, crumbling sidewalks, sewage spilling out of gutters, homeless people lying, in tattered clothes by the roadside. It's nobody is reaching for that anymore. I don't see it anywhere. I mean, even the Christians, they're shy they're like sort of too shy to indulge in the communion. They're too shy to indulge in building any edifice that honors God. There's feels like they're running off the last fumes in the gas tank. It's an incredible sort of extinction of spirit out there. And it's not just in the white community. I mean, there's there are these strange sort of, I mean, everyone knows, how successful the prosperity gospel has become. Right? Turns over here, things adjacent to that are very big.
Yeah.
They turn so many people into these cynical, I don't know. It's very hard to wrestle with it, because you sort of, unless you are possessed by like some kind of otherworldly Kierkegaardian fervor, like you've been, handed some special revelation that removes all resistance to God's light, and it's very hard to pick yourself up and challenge the treacle of inertia and try and swim through it.
Robert, you must not despair.
I don't. I get very close. I never let myself go over the edge. But I mean, look, hey, I'm still here. I'm still doing my funny little stuff in my funny little corner of the world. And if I thought it was over, I would have quit. And so keep going, and I'm going to keep trying. I'll keep doing it until the end. So
that's the British pluck I came for.
Thank you. I think I always admire the Afrikaners for this, is that they can almost do it in a completely unself-conscious sort of way.
Huh.
The sort of one foot in front of the other. No, this is just what we're doing. There's like no even question about it. You keep going forward. Whereas sort of the English mentality requires you to check your tendency to always be looking down.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know. Anyway, I'm sorry. I've been extraordinarily verbose. I hope not boring.
I very much enjoy having you on, Robert. I'm going to wrap up the recording now, but where can people find you and what are they going to find when they get there?
Well, I have a page um, where I have my own, it's under my own name, but the handle is from when I was still anonymous. It's at Umarobane, which is Umarhobane, which means burglar.
Hmm.
Um, and there's also a Substack that I occasionally post on. I only do like the really big pieces. I'll put on there. I publish almost every day on a website called The Cape Independent, which I initially put together because the mainstream newspapers were dodging reporting on the Cape Independence movement because, let's be honest, it's a fairly small movement, not well funded. It has very broad but extremely shallow appeal. So, like, 2/3 of the population in the province say, "Yeah, that's a great idea," but then like 3,000 people will do anything about it.
Yeah.
Then out of them, maybe 50 have actually acted in a sustained way. So yeah, it's very weak, and getting any attention to it was hard. So I put this paper up to give them somewhere where they could put their stuff that would be, more visible. And yeah, then I just sort of kept it going with stuff. I just use it for whatever I'm busy with at the moment. I try and keep it current. Um, and then I have a YouTube channel that I seldom post to, but occasionally, like if something big happens, I'll do a stream on it, just for the sake of having something there. And then I did a series of, as you mentioned earlier, the like dispensation videos that were supposed to be like a crash course on South African history for outsiders. Um, and yeah, that's basically it. Hopefully more soon. Hopefully, a lot of what I'm going to be doing soon may or may not be boring, depending on which things fail or succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Hopefully, some of the exciting stuff will come to pass, and people may know about it within a month, which way I'm headed. A big change is sort of coming here. So,
Excellent. Robert, thank you very much for spending the evening with me. I'll send people to your channels via the links below.
thank you so much, Benjamin. It's been a pleasure, and I have to say, I do very much enjoy watching your channel as well, because um, I've warm up. Uh, when watching, I do actually genuinely enjoy your inputs in things a lot as well, and I enjoy the fact that you managed to cultivate a very calm environment. I really, it's a fantastic reprieve from like the general onslaught
Hmm.
of very high energy. You must see my point of view kind of stuff that you get everywhere. So, yeah, being was the island of sanity amidst the slop.
Ah,
I think your channel is a very, very good contribution. I
that's a
enjoy it.
good. That's a good. An island of sanity amidst the slop. That's a really good tagline.
Yeah.
You're a natural writer.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you for having me on and letting me sort of vent my various sort of emotions for a small while. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it too. Cool, man. Thanks a lot.